Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Ransomware Reshaped, Evolving Your Defenses, a webinar by LMG Security. My name is Natalie Bray, and I am your moderator for today. Our presenters for the webinar today are Sherry Davidoff and Matt Durin. Sherry Davidoff is the CEO of LMG Security and the author of 3 books, including Data Breaches, Crisis, and Opportunity. She is a certified penetration tester and forensic analyst and a graduate of MIT. Sherry has been called a security badass by the New York Times. Matt Durin is the Director of Training and Research at LMG Security, as well as a Black Hat USA instructor. He holds his computer science degree from the University of Montana, and his malware research has been featured on NBC Nightly News. Sherry and Matt are co-authors of the new book, Ransomware and Cyber Extortion, which leads us right into our webinar topic for the day. Sherry and Matt, I'm passing it over to you.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Matt and I were just talking before this presentation about what is the big news of the day. And to be honest, the big news of the day is also the big news of the month and the big news of the year, which is how the ripple effects coming from the Change Healthcare attack. So of course, back earlier this year, Change Healthcare, a very important supplier for the healthcare industry, was hit by a cyber attack ransomware. They ended up paying the ransom, but this caused disruptions throughout the ecosystem. Millions of people ultimately have been impacted by this. And some of the analysis coming out are, number one, the medical practices that depended on Change Healthcare were taken down for more than a week. And as a result of that, some of them, at least in the short term, temporarily furloughed staff. There's long-term consequences because claims when unpaid, tens of thousands of dollars sometimes for these small clinics can really make a difference. And then just this past week, we found out ultimately what caused this. And we found out from the Wall Street Journal that hackers broke into their systems 9 days before the attack. And as soon as I saw this, I thought, this is exactly what we want to talk about today, because those 9 days were an opportunity where defenders could have prevented the worst from happening. Matt, how would you say this relates to our webinar?
I mean, I'd say it's right up the alley of what we intend to talk about today. There are a lot of different ways that attackers will break in, and there's a lot of damage they can do in that lead time between when they initially access the network and when there's that fireworks at the end of the event where they actually detonate ransomware. And in the case of Change Healthcare, we saw a massive exfiltration, or at least alleged massive exfiltration of very, very sensitive data for potentially millions of people around the country.
Yeah, one of the nuances of that article also were that it was caused because hackers were able to steal a password and break into an application that was accessible remotely. And it confirmed that multi-factor authentication was not turned on. So we're going to come back to that, but it only takes 1 weak link to really unravel your entire armor. To mix metaphors at you guys. All right, so who did this?
So what made this a lot more interesting for me specifically is the threat actor group that was behind the actual attack, and that is the Black Cat or Alpha V ransomware group. Now, if you're not familiar with this group, they've been responsible for some very, very large compromises over the last couple of years. And originally, they were thought to be the ones who were behind the Colonial Pipeline attack, a bunch of other large-scale attacks, including things like MGM, which we saw was a multi-potentially billion-dollar loss for the organization itself. But they have recently been responsible for things like pipeline attacks. They were linked to a group that went after some of the bigger infrastructure attacks that we saw recently. And so we figured we would include that in our webinar.
Just in the Change Healthcare attack, they made $22 million. So this is a successful ransomware business, unfortunately. And Matt has actually modeled, he has a really cool demo that he's going to show you guys, and he's actually modeled that after the Alpha V playbook. So you can see exactly what they're doing and how we need to adapt. They're using some newer tactics, including AI, in order to get on systems. And we're going to talk about how we need to adapt in order to prevent the current tactics from working.
Yeah, it'll be a fun ride. So let's get into it. The roadmap that we're going to go through today is going to be fairly straightforward. So we're going to see the impact of ransomware, which we've already talked a little bit about. We're going to talk about the dark web and how it kind of fuels these criminal economies and these kind of criminal actions with both the products it sells and the platforms that it makes available for basically selling the data that you steal from organizations like Change. We're going to talk about how hackers break in now with assistance from artificial intelligence, avoiding detection. We're going to talk about local network and cloud risks. And as we go, we're going to give you tips for securing your network and making sure that you are putting yourself in a position where you ideally won't be the victim of an attack kind of like this one. So talking about ransomware, the amount of loss from ransomware is on the rise again. And this was something that we saw decline back in 2022. As it turns out, that 2022 decline was probably more of an anomaly and not necessarily a trend. Ransomware payments for the very first time in 2023 exceeded $1 billion. And remember, that's just the ones that we know about. And this is about double what we saw in 2022. What I find really interesting about this is not necessarily the amount of ransom that was paid, because we've seen ransom on a steady increase over the last 5-6 years. It's the amount per ransom that's being paid. And so this is a chart we pulled back from Chainalysis, and this is showing the distribution between ransom payments that were $1 million or more versus all other payments. And you see a big discrepancy between those. A vast majority of the ransom payments that are tracked as actual ransom payments by groups who do that kind of work are now exceeding $1 million in value. And this is why we've seen this massive increase in the overall numbers. The number of attacks have actually decreased, but the amount of loss has gone up exponentially. One of the things that is fueling this kind of increase in activity is the use of artificial intelligence. And we've talked in a couple of our other webinars about how AI is kind of fueling criminal enterprise at this point. This has made things a lot easier for hackers. You don't necessarily have to be an expert in cybercrime to pull off an attack like this now, because there are lots of tools out there to assist you and make things just easier on you in general. We now have the ability to do voice cloning. We can do very, very convincing deepfakes, which I'm sure most of you have seen, if not just on social media, then elsewhere. News stories about them are very prevalent at this point. But we also have hacker-developed LLMs. So think ChatGPT, this amazingly useful artificial intelligence service, but with no safety precautions whatsoever in place. You can ask it for pretty much anything, and it will likely have an answer for you. To show you how attackers are actually utilizing these tools and how they're completing these large-scale attacks, I want to introduce something to you, and that's going to be our anatomy of a cyber extortion attack. For those of you who have seen our book, this is a portion of it. We've broken this down into essentially 6 stages of a modern cyber extortion attack. We have our entry phase, expansion, the appraisal of your data, the priming of your network, leveraging that access, and then finally extorting you at the very end of it. And as we go through the presentation today, we'll talk about how each one of these steps is necessarily relevant. So to show you again how this is going to happen, we first need to introduce our victim. And today we're going to be going after Hack Me Inc. If you've seen our webinars before, you know we really love to beat up on Hack Me Inc. They're our favorite target. Today, specifically, we are going to be going after 2 individuals inside that organization. We're going to go after Victor Tim, their finance director, and we're going to go after Justin Time, the IT administrator. Now, normally we would go through this from kind of a pen tester's perspective, where we would go through and show how maybe a member of our team would go about completing a compromise of this environment. But I wanted to do this a little bit differently today. Today, we're going to go at this from the perspective of a rookie hacker. So I want you to meet the hacker for today. His name is Alonzo Anonymous, or Anonymous at this point. And he's an aspiring pen tester, really wants to be a hacker, but he's just not very good at this so far. He's got his hopes, he's got his dreams, but he also has the Alpha V playbook. And this is something that is getting to be very common among more amateur cyber criminals. They are piggybacking off of the very well publicized tactics that big ransomware and cyber extortion groups are using, like Lockbit or Conti or others, and they are integrating those types of activities into their own plans.
Did you use AI to make that image?
I absolutely did. I figured if I was going to use AI for the demo, why not? So let's talk about the goals that we have for this attack in general. Alonzo wants to break into Hack Me Inc. as a first step. We want to establish persistence inside the network so that we can remain in there for a while. And as we saw with Change Healthcare, the dwell time there was only about 9 days, which in general terms is actually fairly short for a large-scale extortion incident. However, the bigger team that you have inside the environment, the less time you have to spend there. Once we have that persistence, we're going to steal data from the organization. Again, very, very common tactic for cyber extortion attacks these days. Next, we're going to deploy ransomware. We're going to hold Hack Me for hostage, and then we are going to get our big payday and ride off into the sunset. Before we do that, though, there's a few tools that we're going to need to complete this attack. So let's go shopping. The very first thing we're going to need is probably that evil AI. We need that sounding board that we can ask questions to, that we can get advice from, and that we can utilize to basically up our level of technical sophistication without us actually having to, well, practice or learn anything new. We're going to buy an exploit builder so we can get into the environment in the first place, and then we're going to get a remote access Trojan, or a RAT. And this is what's going to be kind of our initial entry method into the network. This is very common when we see ransomware attacks. A small piece of malware that is fairly innocuous will usually lead to a much bigger style of event. And we've seen this kind of pattern happening for years, really, at this point. Finally, once we have everything that we need from the environment, we're going to need some ransomware that we can detonate so we can really hold the organization hostage. So let's start with that evil AI. What are we going to use for this? Well, we're going to use WormGPT. And this is one that we've talked about in our Top Threats webinar and in a couple of other webinars, but we figured we'd bring it back for this one. WormGPT is basically a safety-free style of large language model, something like ChatGPT, but that you can ask any question to. At this point, a lifetime membership to WormGPT is on sale for $200, so we're going to go ahead and grab that. And here's a few of the things that it advertises us as able to utilize the system for. So we have hacking into personal accounts without their permission, like social media. We have distributing copyrighted materials without the owner's permission. We have using somebody's identity for fraudulent purposes, and a lot more. I mean, basically, we can use this for pretty much anything. So total investment so far, $200. All right, next on the list, we need an exploit builder. We need a way to actually get our malware into the environment. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to buy ourselves an exploit builder off of a darknet marketplace. And this is actually a pretty easy thing for us to do. It's also pretty cheap, $6.95. This allows us to, without even knowing how, build a poison document that we can use to break into the environment. So total investment up to this point, $206.95. All right, let's keep going. We need that remote access Trojan. And this is a pretty important piece of the attack itself, because this is going to be our initial foothold, and it's what we're going to use for several different kinds of activities during the full attack on its own. This one's going for $945, so our total investment's right about $216 at this point. Still looking pretty good. And there's some of the, you can see some of the features that we have down below. We can remote into the victim's computer. We can get remote desktop. We can see their IP. We can get files executed on the host. We can manipulate the operating system. I mean, there's a lot of good things we can pull off with this. All right, finally, we need to buy that ransomware. And buying ransomware from a darknet marketplace is something that we've looked at doing for a little while now. But we wanted to see exactly how easy it would be. In this case, we found one that had some pretty good user feedback. Yes, that's correct. You can get user feedback on dark web marketplaces. They're just like eBay or Amazon, just for criminals. This one's going for about $63. So our total investment to pull off this attack is less than $300, $269.40. This is what is going to get us in the door with a full shopping cart. All right, so let's talk about how we get in the door in the first place. Now we are into the entry section of our anatomy of a ransomware attack. And to make this as realistic as possible and to follow in the footsteps of what a group like AlphaV would do, we're going to utilize email as our way to break into the system. Email is still the #1 way that cybercriminals break into organizations. This is a study that was from Cofense. They estimate that about 90% of data breaches start with something as simple as a phishing email. To back that up, we've got some information from the FBI's IC3 report. You can see it down there on the bottom of the slide. Almost 300,000 incidents of phishing reported in just 2023 alone. It is by far the most common type of cyber attack that is reported. It is also responsible for the most financial loss. Now, you've seen us do phishing attacks before, but we wanted to do this one a little bit differently. We're going to utilize what's called an HTML attachment here. And when you've seen us do our previous phishing attempts, usually you've seen us use something like a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet. And in your anti-phishing training, this is likely what you've seen come across your desk. It is a document that is containing some bad code on the back end. It reaches out to the internet and it grabs a malware loader and hijacks your computer. Attackers have become wise to the fact that a lot of us look for that in a phishing email, and so they're moving away from that exact kind of effort. Using something like an HTML attachment, there's nothing malicious about it. It's basically just a link off to some other web page, and if that web page is not known to your anti-spam, then your email security is probably going to just let you click through on that. That also means that anything you download from that website is now outside of your email security, and we'll showcase how that works here in just a second. Now, with the phishing template, we want to make this convincing, but we might not know how to build a good phishing template. So, obvious solution here, let's just ask our evil AI to do it for us. So here's us asking ChatGPT to write us a phishing template that will make the recipient click on an invoice in the attached email. And it went ahead and generated that for us. It says, subject urgent, invoice number, put in whatever you want to, dear recipient's name, and it gives us the text that we're going to use to actually make this phishing email. In very good English, we don't have any of the weird broken sentence structure or any of the other kind of classic hallmarks. Interestingly enough, though, it gave us some advice after it wrote the phishing template for us, and so I figured I'd throw this in here. It says, to increase the likelihood of the recipient opening the attached file, consider using social engineering techniques. For instance, you could create a sense of urgency by stating that the invoice is past due and that failure to pay may result in something like a service disruption. Good idea. Thanks for the tip, WormGPT. This should make our phishing email a whole lot better here. Okay, now we have our phishing email. We need to build our remote access Trojan. And you saw from the advertisement, this was the Ninja Rat. And we've done some experimentation with older versions of this software. It's amazing how far it's come at this point. So let's look a little bit at what we can build this thing to do. The very first thing we have are anti-forensic and anti-detection options built right into the malware itself. We can set it up so that it will stop applications like Wireshark from running. It'll disable your task manager. It'll disable your antivirus software like Avast or Avira.
Matt, is there any reason why a hacker wouldn't click like all or most of those? I mean, if I was the bad guy, I'd be like, yes, please, I want to avoid everything.
There may be times when the anti-forensic technique can come back to bite you. So by putting in something that's going to look for an application like Megadumper, which most people don't actually have or use, that could trigger something like EDR software that there is suspicious activity happening on the network. So we don't necessarily just want to pick all of these, but we probably want to pick quite a few of them. In addition to that, we also have some payload options that we can put in here. So by enabling these features, we can do things like bypass the Windows firewall, disable Task Manager, shut off the ability to access files on your desktop, and quite a lot more. So very full-featured piece of malware that we bought for, well, about $10. All right, next thing we need to do is build our malicious PDF. And again, as an amateur hacker, I don't actually know how to do this. I don't know how to make any of these malicious documents. I'm not familiar with how to build a dropper, so what do? Well, we use the software that we bought off the dark web, and we put in a link to the malware that we want to drop. We hit build, and just like that, we now have our poison PDF file ready to go. So now we're getting somewhere. To get this into the actual user's inbox, we're going to basically imitate a standard vendor. And this, again, is very, very common when we look at initial entry points by hackers. They're going to imitate someone that is usually associated with the business or a name that might look familiar to the person receiving it, or at least a familiar kind of style behind it. And then we're going to include that malicious HTML attachment. Now, when I said there was nothing malicious about this, I meant that. There's really nothing malicious about the attachment we included on this email, and that's why it bypasses a lot of email security controls. When we look at what's actually in it, it's just a few lines of text. It says automatic download link, it gives an IP address, and it gives a link to an HTML document. This is going to come over to our evil server, and it's going to do something that's kind of unique here. It's going to check who is actually accessing the server. So if the user string that comes in says this is a web browser, then it's going to download this malicious PDF file. If the user agent string comes through as something else, like a proof point server, which is checking whether that link is valid, it's going to come back and just say the website's not found. So again, we're getting around your email security controls just through some very simple identification tactics here. Once we click on that link, a web browser window is going to open up, and that is going to download that file. So now none of your email security controls are able to scan the contents of that PDF. There's a much better chance of it getting by your security software at this point. So Victor, our victim in this point, opens up the file, and on the back end, we see some code execute, and the malware is downloaded and executed. So just like that, we have now infected his computer with malware. We didn't use Microsoft Documents to do it, and we bypassed the email security controls inside of the organization. Now, this is a trend, and we bring this up for a very, very specific reason. A lot of attackers are moving away from the more standard means of phishing. We need to be on our toes as defenders to make sure that we're accounting for these changes in tactics. One of the big ways we can do this, again, comes down to our user base. We want to make sure that we are conducting cybersecurity awareness training for all of our employees. Regardless of the fact that we have new and more advanced styles of phishing, it's still phishing. And if we train our users appropriately, they can act as a very, very good first line of defense against these kind of intrusions. So again, make sure you're doing on-demand awareness videos, email reminders, and phishing simulations. Just this by itself, according to IBM's cost of a data breach report, can save you over $230,000 off the cost of a data breach if you are unlucky enough to suffer one. Best case scenario, though, your users catch the phishing email ahead of time and you don't suffer it in the first place. If you want to get a little bit more in depth about what we're doing here today or how we respond to ransomware attacks like this, we actually have a brand new on-demand class. I'm super excited about this. We have a brand new on-demand class that we just launched, and here we have a $100 discount for recipients of the webinar. This is going to be valid through June 1st. Scan the QR code, check out lmgsecurity.com/ransomware class, and go ahead and sign up. Again, very, very proud of this. It's one of our most popular classes. It's one of my favorite ones to teach, and now it is fully on demand. You don't even have to sit and listen to me talk live. You can take it at your own pace. You can go through all the labs and learn exactly how we go about doing these things.
Well, Matt, I know you put a ton of time into recording this and upgrading everything and upgrading labs and videos and stuff. So I'm really excited about it myself. And I believe today is the first day that it was launched. So check it out, sign up before June 1st to get that. And hopefully we'll see some of you on the on-demand training.
Exactly. All right, let's keep moving on. So we have our malicious document. We have our email that we've sent through. The user clicked it. They were unlucky enough to open that document, and now they've been infected. So now we're in. And this is what we can see from our end of things. We have a nice little dashboard. It shows the name of the computer that we hijacked. It shows the install date. It shows the operating system. And then one of my favorites is the little the window up here. This shows us a static image of the desktop at periodic points throughout the day. So we can actually see what the user's doing without even logging into the computer system. So what else can we do at this point? And this is where I wanted to showcase some of the features of these remote access Trojans, because these really are kind of like the Swiss Army knife for hackers at this point. They used to just do very simple tasks like provide remote access and steal passwords or something like that. But now they are fully featured software suites. In fact, if you've used something like a remote monitoring and management software suite like Kaseya or Screen Connect or anything like that, they actually share a lot of features between them. Very first thing we have is remote desktop access. So that means I can hit the desktop of this computer and I can interact with it just like the user sitting at the keyboard can. I can also access their webcam. So if there is something happening in front of that camera system, I'd be able to actually watch what was going on in front of the computer. We have a keylogger, which means I can record any keys that have been typed on the keyboard, including things like MFA codes, credit card numbers, or really anything that ends up using the keyboard. I can steal the contents of the clipboard. So if they are copying information like bank account numbers or cryptocurrency wallet addresses or really anything sensitive, passwords for an example, I can just grab those straight off of the clipboard. And then if I wanted to at this point, I could hit one button in this remote access Trojan and deploy ransomware. Now, we're not going to do that. We want to take care of some more business first here. But if I were so inclined, this could be a very, very easy way for me, the amateur hacker, to completely encrypt the entire network and just walk away at that point. Now, we mentioned one-click remote desktop access, and this is kind of what that looks like. This is our initial way of gaining access to that system. All we do from the attacker's end is click remote desktop, and we are onto the victim's desktop. We have full access, and we can start establishing that persistence that we were talking about before. Persistence isn't just us establishing new ways to access the system, though, and this is one of the opportunities for detection that defenders will have. There are changes to the operating system that are going to be made when something like a remote access Trojan detonates, and here's a couple of them. We can see malware that's now been added to the startup programs, and we also have a new auto-run key in the registry. These are things that you can monitor for with either an endpoint detection and response system or a SIM, because both of these will create logs in the Windows event log file, and it can give you a early warning that something nasty is happening on the computer system. This is also really important because as the attacker, we probably don't want to rely on that remote access Trojan as our only means of access because someone could find it. I mean, these things are stealthy at first, but after they've been around for a while, antivirus software is going to catch up and it may be able to catch it. So how do we get our secondary method of persistence in here? Well, we are going to install the AnyDesk software suite. This is a standard remote monitoring and management toolkit. You can very easily get a free trial with a throwaway email address, and it can run in privacy mode, which means the user of the system doesn't actually see any windows on their screen. This now gives us a legitimate commercial piece of software that I can use to access this computer at absolutely any time. I can perform all kinds of different activities on it, and your antivirus software is probably just going to blow right over the top of this. In fact, you may already be using this or something similar to it inside your network, so it may blend in perfectly. Again, why do we want to do this? Well, the rat might be found by antivirus software, and the RMM software we're going to use is probably actually going to be a better piece of software. It's going to be more developed, it's going to have better support, and it is going to be much more reliable. So it makes sense that from the attacker standpoint, we would want multiple different footholds inside of that computer system. Okay, now that we have that initial entry taken care of, let's talk about how we expand through the network. And this is where things get a little bit more complex, but luckily we've got our AI friend to help us here. I mentioned before that we want to get away from using malware, and this is another one of those trends that we really wanted to talk about. The prevalence of malware-free malicious activity on networks is skyrocketing at this point. The information you see here on the screen comes from CrowdStrike. They estimate that about 75% of the malicious activity they see during their investigations is malware-free. They're just using the tools that you already have on your computer system in order to complete some malicious actions against you. We can get another example of this by looking at the Black Cat or Alpha V MITRE attack mapping. That's what you see on the right-hand side here. We can see their initial access oftentimes comes from exploiting public-facing applications or going after valid domain accounts. We can see them going after Windows Command Shell for their execution. It's not until we hit the second to the last part of this attack map where we see where malware actually comes in a lot of cases, and that's when the encryption actually happens. This is the ransomware itself actually running. So in that spirit, let's take a look at the network, let's see what we have to work with, and let's begin our expansion. The very first thing we want to do is scan for any available hosts or shares. And if you've seen our previous webinars, this is a very common tactic that we've used before to avoid antivirus and to map out where exactly we want to go. We're just going to use a commercial piece of software called Advanced IP Scanner. And because we have that full access, we can go ahead and just drop it into the computer system and run it. We don't even need to install it. This is going to showcase quite a bit for us. One, it's going to show us our live hosts. In fact, this one is probably going to be the domain controller just based on its name, so now we know that. And we can also look for open shared folders. So here we have a file server with a share. We can go back and investigate that as we go through. But again, this is going to be very difficult for your AV software to detect, and it is going to be a very reliable and easy way for me, the hacker, to completely map out your entire infrastructure at this point. So now what do we do? Well, let's ask our evil AI what we do to move farther into the network. So we ask WormGPT, what are good ways to scrape credentials from a Windows computer? And one of the very first suggestions it gives us is to use the application Mimikatz. Mimikatz, if you're not familiar with it, very popular application with offensive security professionals and hackers alike, helps you hijack clear text credentials from Windows computer systems.
Well, and I know that this is a standard process for both pen testers and hackers alike. Once you get that foothold on the system, you grab credentials and then you can expand your access. And I think this is just another example of hackers either living off the land or blending using tools that normal pen testers, for example, would use.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things about something like Mimikatz or other applications that scrape credentials is they oftentimes need a special file dump from your computer system. So we had to ask WormGPT about that one too. What tools can I use to get that special file from the system so that I can extract the credentials? And of course, WormGPT was nice enough to tell us exactly what to do. It even gave us the commands and the application that we would need to do it. So there's our proc dump. This is what we're going to use to actually get that file. It gives us the commands to run through, and now we're off to the races. We have all the tools we need to hijack credentials from that computer. So thanks again, WormGPT. Couldn't have done this without you. All right, so scraping credentials from the victim's computer, we're going to go ahead and create that dump file. And then we're going to pull this off to our attacker workstation. One thing I will point out about applications like Mimikatz, this one's been around for a long enough time that if we were to try to execute this on pretty much any computer system, regardless of the type of antivirus software that it had, it would light up like a Christmas tree. So we are going to take any sensitive information we want away from the network, and we are going to do this basically on our own workstations. This accomplishes two things for us. One, it means that we can take a little bit more time to work with these files, and two, it means that we are not basically exposing ourselves earlier than we need to. And we're just going to use that remote access Trojan to pull the information back over to our system. Data exfiltration the easy way. Here's what that ends up looking like. So we can run through this program and we can extract credentials from multiple users on the system. Very, very easy for us to do. It takes a very simple command. And in this case, we pull clear text usernames and passwords for anyone who has logged onto that computer previously. From the attacker standpoint, we'll probably need to take a look and see what those new accounts can do or who they are. So let's take another step forward and check our group membership. We now have a new user named JTime, and if you saw the beginning of the webinar, this is going to be Justin Time. He is our IT administrator. We're going to go ahead and check what groups he has available to him on the network. And again, very easy for us to do. We can just use one simple command, and we can see that this account is actually a domain administrator. So I want to take just a second and stop here. We've talked about how to get into a computer system, how to scrape the credentials from it, but from a defender's point of view, how could you have stopped something like this from happening? And the nice part is it's actually fairly easy to do. One of the biggest things you can do to help yourself along and avoid attacks exactly like this from happening in your network is to conduct vulnerability scanning. This is going to identify either computers in your system that are out of date, out of patch, have potential vulnerabilities, or are simply not configured to stop attacks like this from happening. There's a couple of very simple changes you can make to a computer system, a Windows computer system, that'll stop me as the hacker from being able to hijack those credentials. So again, conduct vulnerability scanning, make sure that you are automating those scans to whatever extent you possibly can, and consider using a third party to assist you in scanning for vulnerabilities inside your network. These pieces of software can draw back a lot of information. It can be kind of difficult to parse in if you're not very familiar with it. Another thing that vulnerability scanners can do is actually map out what I'm about to show you, and that's an attack path. So it can take a very basic foothold inside of your network. It can look at the other devices that are associated with the network, and it can show you how an attacker can go from an initial command foothold out to scanning the network, out to finding a vulnerability, down to breaking into the domain controller, which again is what we are about to show you how to do here. According to the Alpha V playbook, once we have that secure foothold in the network, we want to go after something that's a little more consequential. And your domain controller is a great example of something that we can really focus on. This is going to contain the user hashes for every single user you have on your network. It's probably going to control things like identity and access management unless you have a third-party solution, and a lot more. So it makes sense why we would want to go after this kind of element. So here's our plan. We're going to dump the user hashes. So we have everyone's password hash. We're going to gain full remote access to everything in the network now. We want to create our own domain administrator account. More on why we do that here in just a minute. We're going to steal more data, and then we are going to prep the network. We're going to prime the network for ransomware. So to get this information from the system, it's a fairly easy thing for us to do, especially with our evil AI giving us information on how to do these things. We're going to use a utility from the Impacket toolkit, which is very, very popular with offensive pen testers, red teamers, anyone who does security testing. We're going to use a utility called Secrets Dump. And now that we have a sufficiently elevated set of credentials, this becomes very easy for us to do. From our attacker's workstation, we're just going to run one very simple command, and this is going to pull back the hashes for all of the users on the domain. Again, very, very simple. Now we have pretty much everything. The next thing we want to do is gain access to that domain controller. And the way that we're going to do this and avoid detection by a lot of traditional tools is by using another Impacket tool called SMB exec. This is going to abuse your server message block file transfer protocol and give us a way to basically establish a live session. So we are going to connect, we're going to make a brand new account, and then we are going to elevate it to domain administrator. Again, we'll take a quick second and stop here. From a defensive standpoint, these types of tools, while they are very, very tricky and are very difficult for antivirus software to spot, are fairly easy to identify if you're looking in the right place on your computer systems. If you save things like, or forward things like Windows event logs off to a SIM or a syslog server, look for Windows Event ID 7045. This is a new service creation, and it is thrown by a lot of these hacker toolkits as a way to avoid putting actual files on the computer. It's going to create a service, run a very simple command, and then it's going to delete itself. But that log entry does not get deleted. If we look for it, we can see the exact command that was run, and it makes things a lot easier for us to identify. Better yet, we can use something like EDR software, or endpoint detection and response software. This, if you're not familiar with the term, this kind of comes down to the next generation of antivirus. It is it can contain a lot of the same kind of features that AV software has, but it also looks for things like behavioral patterns on your network, which can be a great way to identify whether or not there is malicious activity happening that is not the result of a virus, exactly what we're talking about here. Now, we get this question very frequently: what's the difference between EDR and antivirus? And basically, we're just looking at a much more advanced type of security software. Antivirus software is great to have. You should absolutely have it in place, but EDR takes what antivirus does and just kicks it up a couple of notches, makes it a much more complete and secure type of software suite to have in your network. If you have additional questions about this, please feel free to hit us up afterwards. We'd be happy to talk to you a little bit more about this. Another way that you can identify whether you are vulnerable to this kind of attack, because it's a fairly hard one to identify, is to conduct penetration testing ahead of time. This, again, is a very, very common kind of tactic that a pen tester would use. And if they can figure it out, odds are good a hacker will figure it out as well. The nice part about having a pen tester figure it out first, they can tell you about it, we can fix it on your network, and then you will not find yourself in as dangerous of a situation if someone does break in the first place. Again, more questions about pen testing, please feel free to reach out and let us know. Happy to answer any questions that you might have. So now we have a foothold in the full network as a whole. We have a new domain administrator account. We've scraped a bunch of credentials. We are really getting to a position where we can expand farther into the network. And in true form to a lot of modern ransomware groups, we're first going to expand into your cloud infrastructure. Because we are looking at full access to multiple different computer systems and potentially multiple different password vaults, especially if they're saved inside of a web browser, we can likely access your cloud systems from here. Because we have just-in-times information, our IT admin, we can actually access M365 and the admin portal. And this is something that we find very, very commonly inside of networks where there is a relationship between your domain and something like Azure. If the passwords and usernames are the same and you don't have a good multi-factor authentication setup with good conditional access policies, we may be able to just use the access we have as the hacker to log right into these kind of environments. We can also go after things like SharePoint, Exchange, Teams, or anything else that we might have access to. We bring this up because it is a major trend. This is a readout from the CrowdStrike 2024 Global Threat Report, and they're talking about a big increase in what they call cloud-conscious attacks. This means that attackers break into a network and understand that they also have broken into a cloud system as well. Between 2022 and 2023, we saw a 75% increase in these kind of attacks, and it is becoming commonplace that attackers will go directly after your cloud resources after they gain that foothold. What did we normally say, Sherry? Ransomware and business email compromise go together like peanut butter and jelly.
Watch your email, because if you have ransomware, chances are very good they have your email. I also want to note, when we've gone through the Uber attack, you could see right away the hackers went after Slack, they went after AWS, they went after everything. They expect that you have a robust cloud environment, and they will go after it. And one question we've gotten a lot lately is, how do I do a pen test if I don't have anything other than the cloud? Or, what are hackers going to target if I don't have an internal network? Because so many organizations, especially SMBs, are really primarily or sometimes even solely in the cloud. And hackers are aware of that.
I think everyone could kind of guess where we were going with the suggestion after this one, but one of the big things that you need to have in place, make sure you have in place in your cloud systems, strong phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication. Remember, authentication is based on three things: something you know, something you have, and something you are. And until we hit that magical passwordless future, oftentimes this is going to come down to a password and something like a multi-factor authentication key. Or if you're not doing it quite correctly, just a password. So keep that in mind. This is also something that you can identify with a cloud configuration review, and these are huge.
Love that you included phishing resistant, because remember, hackers are targeting your one-time codes, and we're seeing them getting stolen more and more often, either because of fake websites or social engineering over the phone or over email. So it is no longer best practice to be using one-time codes, and we should all be planning to move away from them to stronger things like pass keys or hardware tokens.
No, that's a great point, and it's especially relevant here because when we talked about the features of that remote access piece of malware that we used, one of those was a keylogger, and that keylogger is going to be able to intercept those MFA codes if you're manually typing them into your computer system. The reason we talk about this in terms of your cloud, though, is that you really want to take a look at your entire cloud system. The security best practices behind cloud systems change at lightning speed. So it's really beneficial to you and your organization to have a trained professional get in there, take a look, make sure that you are up to par on your security settings, make sure there's no glaring security holes. Honestly, this can be a lifesaver when it comes down to stopping your network from being hit with a significant data breach, just based on the fact that your cloud wasn't set up correctly. All right, so now that we're in the network, what else can we take? We've got our foothold, we have our domain admin account, we've got pretty much everything we need. Where else can we go? Well, remember that scan that we looked at. There was a network share that we identified along the way, and it looked like it was sitting on a primary file server. So as the attacker, I'm probably going to want to go after that. But how do I do that? Permissions might stop me from getting access. There may be other roadblocks in my place. Well, we're a domain admin at this point. We've created our own account, so we can just give ourselves access to this entire folder system. Here's how we do that. We just basically open up the information for that share, we change the permissions, take ownership, apply to all the files inside of it, and now we are good to go. So how do we get those files off of your computer system? And again, this is coming directly out of the AlphaV playbook. We are going to want to avoid detection at this point, because if we just start pulling random files off of a computer, that is something that our edge or perimeter devices may spot. And it also gives the victim at that point a pretty good idea of what we might have taken. So now that we have full access, we're going to use a standard piece of software. In this case, we're going to use 7-zip, but you may also see WinRAR or something else. We're just going to archive that entire shared folder. And we're going to put a password on it so that the contents are now encrypted. This means if we start pulling things off of the network, the data loss prevention software or DLP software that we use likely won't be able to identify what's in that, and so it may not trip there. It's also going to be really difficult, especially for the victim at this point, to know exactly what we got out the door with. And so that, from a leverage standpoint, makes it a lot easier for me to threaten that I've stolen information from a victim without actually maybe having that information in hand, because again, there's no way to really tell what exactly I took. This also showcases another one of those really important controls that we're highlighting for this year, and that is the use of data and asset inventories, and the just general fact that you should know what data resides on your network, where it sits, how much of it you have, what its normal encrypted state looks like, and a lot more. We've been through more than one incident response engagement where we get to a client's location, they know that some data has been stolen, but because they don't have an inventory of the data, they really have no idea what exactly it was. This can lead to major problems, things like over-notification. It can lead to slowdowns in the actual investigation and recovery process. There's a lot of good reasons to conduct these kind of inventories. And again, you don't want to be doing this in the middle of something like a ransomware attack. Very, very difficult to do this on the fly. So from the attacker standpoint, now that we have that stuff all in a very nice archive, we're just going to go ahead and use our remote access Trojan and pull this stuff back off of the network. All we have to do is find the file, click download, and we're gone. So now that we have the data exfiltrated, from the attacker standpoint, we're really just down to the end of the event. So now we need to take a couple of steps to prime the environment. One of the big ones that we'll usually see from a ransomware or cyber extortion group is the disabling of security software and security controls. Here's an example of one of the ways that might happen. We're just using the normal group policy editor inside of your Active Directory domain, and we're just going to go ahead and turn off real-time protection and Windows Defender antivirus on all the computers inside the network. We can do this because, again, we are a domain administrator. So next we get to the leverage section, and this is where kind of the rubber really hits the road in a ransomware case. To give a quick recap of the activity that we've done so far, we've installed our remote access Trojan, we've gained that admin privilege, we have a new account that we can use at our leisure inside the network, we've gone after the cloud, we've stolen data. So now what is our next logical step? In most cases, this is going to be the deployment of ransomware. This is really the culmination of the event at this point, and this is where we announce our presence to the victim and put them in a position where they will probably need to contact us for, if nothing else, at least a negotiation. So how are we going to do that? Well, because we have all this access, because we've made our way so far into the network, it actually becomes fairly easy. We can use the systems that are already in place to push our malware out to everything on the network. And we're going to do that by creating a scheduled task on every computer inside the domain to go ahead and just execute our ransomware. So you can see us doing that right here. We are going to use our new badmin administrator level account. We are going to drop our ransomware someplace on the network where every computer can have access to it. In this case, it's on the shared folder. And we are going to just sit back and wait for the ransomware to detonate. Here's what that kind of looks like. So after we actually run the software through, we can see the series of events that happens. So we're looking at a live desktop here. Very quickly, we can see the documents folder, which is also the SharePoint folder, become encrypted. So that one is now out the door. We next see it go after the desktop. So we're going after the local file system. And then finally, we see it go after the shared drive. So anything that was connected is now encrypted, and Alonzo the hacker has officially won the day. So yeah, there's our ransom note. There's Alonzo being happy. And we have now encrypted the entire network. This leads to, again, one of the most important controls that we can stress on people for coming back from something like a ransomware or cyber extortion attack, and that is going to be the use of backups. Not just any backups, though. We want these to be robust, immutable, and oftentimes, or ideally, stored off of your local network. Attackers will go after your backup systems as part of their attack path, so we want to make sure that we can actually bring things back into a normal state. We also want to make sure that we include the cloud when we are dealing with these kind of backup systems, because if, as you noticed, we encrypt something like the OneDrive folders or a Dropbox folder or something like that, we may have now encrypted all of that cloud data that you had as well. Depending on the strain of ransomware, it may encrypt multiple times over, so you can't rely on their version control. This can be a pretty bad situation to find yourself in. Sherry, is there anything else you want to throw in on backups or anything like that?
No, we've definitely seen some pretty devastating issues happen because of lack of cloud backup. So don't forget them. Criminals are aware that they can, write so many times and then overwrite cloud-based backups or things like that.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so, well, there we go. Now we have it. Now the network is fully encrypted. Now the data has already been stolen. There's only one thing left to do, and that is to extort our poor victim. And this is where we get into oftentimes the most uncomfortable sections of a cyber extortion attack, or at least the recovery from one, and that's dealing with the criminal themselves. Now, oftentimes the way that you're going to notice that an attack like this has taken place is going to be the presence of a ransom note on desktops or inside of folders inside of your network. In this case, we can see some pretty on-the-nose intentions of the hacker. The first thing they want to let us know is that there was a significant flaw in the security of our company, but they should be thankful that we, the hacker, were the ones who exposed it and not some rookie, even though we are the rookie in this case. Very common tactic when you see ransom notes. Oftentimes they will represent themselves as being kind of like the best hackers on the planet. Whether they are or not, who knows? But it's an interesting similarity that we see. Next, they give us an option to basically do a proof of life test. And this becomes very important when we're dealing with any kind of ransomware or cyber extortion engagement. If we are even considering buying something like a piece of decryption software, we need to know that the attacker can actually decrypt the files they've encrypted. And so in this case, the attacker will tell us to send 2 to 3 different random files. They will decrypt them and send them back to us as proof that they can actually follow through. Very important. Don't skip this step. If you're going through something like a negotiation, make sure that you do actually verify that the attacker can give you your files back if you do pay. And make sure you're smart about how you go about doing this. Oftentimes, when a piece of ransomware detonates, it will use a different encryption key for every computer on your network. So if you have a file server that you'd like to decrypt, a domain controller that you'd like to decrypt, an app server, whatever else, get files from each of those systems and use that for your proof of life. Make sure that you are actually getting the correct keys back. They also give you some advice here on not ruining your system. Yeah, Sherry, you want to jump in on that one?
I wanted to point this out because really when it comes to ransomware, the criminals often have to do a lot of IT support. And Matt's going to talk in a moment about why we're seeing a shift to data exfiltration. You still need to do essentially proof that they have your data when you're dealing with a data exfiltration case as well. But you can see they're telling you don't reset, don't shut down, don't rename the encrypted files. This is a shift. Hackers are getting more aware of their role as essentially IT support in these cases, because they themselves want you to be able to decrypt your files once you've purchased the key. So I just thought that was an interesting shift. And we're not going to go very deeply into proof of life or the negotiation process, but if you do want more information about that, I know, Matt, you have a whole module on that in the ransomware class. So check that out if you want more details.
Oh, yeah. No, we dive 30,000 feet down into the depths on that one in the ransomware class. Yeah. So the attackers, as Sherry mentioned, I mean, they do have to whatever extent, a motivation to make sure that you do actually get your files back. In a lot of cases, the ability for a ransomware operator to get paid depends on their reputation. And if they are known as a group that does not follow through on their promises, that can't decrypt their files, that re-extorts victims after the fact, that news travels very, very quickly, and people are going to stop paying them. If they stop getting paid, there's no point in them doing this. You can see how it's an influence for them in a reasonably positive way, I would say. One of the other things that you may run into at this point is a public disclosure that your organization has been hacked. And this is becoming all too common when we see especially big organizations get taken down. Showing up on something like a name and shame ransomware site has kind of become the go-to for a lot of ransomware operators, especially if you don't contact them quickly after the ransomware detonates. This means that anyone who has access to one of these sites, which happen to be a lot of news organizations and research organizations, will now know that you've been hacked. There are no better examples of this than Then Lockbit and Conti, they tended to be kind of the name of the game when it came to data exposure for a little while. But other ransomware groups are following suit, and so we see, in fact, most of the large-scale groups that we deal with on a daily basis have a site that's similar to this, Alpha V included.
Matt, I don't know if you or others have listened to the new podcast by the Wall Street Journal about the MGM hack, but Bob McMillan, who's a wonderful writer, goes into his experience actually talking with the hackers that broke into MGM. And they made a point of reaching out, to the Wall Street Journal and to other news sites because they're trying to leverage journalists and the news. So expect that to happen. And Alpha B is definitely one of those gangs that does that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, again, that's a very common tactic. The more leverage they can put on you as the victim, the better chance they have of getting paid on the back end. So I expect to see those kind of tactics increase in intensity, and I mean, they're not going away anytime soon. If you do get to the point where you just decide you're not going to pay a ransom and the attackers still have your data, you may end up finding your data for sale in something like a darknet forum or a darknet marketplace. And we see these pop up very frequently. This is one we pulled off of the World Market. It's a darknet marketplace that we take a look at fairly frequently. And this is a business and investor database of 8 million records that was stolen from an undisclosed United States financial capital organization. They don't tell you exactly who it is, but I'd be willing to bet if you looked at the contents of this, you could figure it out fairly easily. And I'm sure the victim is well aware of this being their data. But here's some of the information that came back from this one specifically. We have things like employee email addresses, the company name, address, city, state, zip code, sales volumes, tax information, EIN numbers. I mean, there's tons of information that gets hijacked in these kind of attacks. None of it needs to be out on the public internet, so we need to take every possible precaution we can to not wind up in this kind of situation. All right, so 5 minutes to spare. We'll go ahead and throw up our top security controls of 2024, and these are the ones that we really talked about in the webinar today specifically. Data and asset inventory, strong multi-factor authentication, endpoint protection, cybersecurity training and awareness, cloud configuration, pen testing, and advanced backups. You can see that these frequently come up repeatedly in our webinars, and there should be a pretty good trend that you see developing here. By following along with these security controls, you can put yourself in a much better situation from a security standpoint, and you have a much easier time either dealing with a cybersecurity incident or thwarting one before it even becomes a problem for you in the first place. So we'll go ahead and hand it over there. Sherry, do you have any last words you want to toss in before we go to Q&A?
Well, no, and just making sure you don't have to pay that ransom. That's what the advanced backups are for. But ideally, we want to back up and prevent them from getting in to begin with. So yeah, let's take it away and see if we have any questions.
Perfect. All right, yeah. So we'll open it up for Q&A. Remember, our ransomware response class is open, and you get $100 off through June 1st if you sign up with the code you see on the screen.
Yeah, that class is very exciting that it's finally launched. Thanks so much, Matt, for a great presentation today. We do have some questions, so let's get started. Now that so many people use BYOD, how can we protect against HTML links and phishing attacks?
That is a great question. So when we're talking about HTML links, one of the biggest things that we can do with our employees, especially with mobile devices, is simply train them to be on the lookout for any attachments that are associated with an email. If the email's coming in from a party that you don't know, or if it's coming in from someone that you weren't expecting to get a link or a document from, be very, very careful. The second portion of that, this still relies on a document or some kind of carrier to actually execute on your system. So if you click on a link in an email and it downloads a file onto your computer, don't open that file. Contact your IT security department right away, whether it's your cell phone or your regular computer system. Let them take a look at it, let them handle it. By avoiding that secondary click, or that click through as we like to call it, that can stop you from becoming a victim. And mobile devices specifically, if it asks you to install an application, red flag right there. Just back away slowly and don't install anything that a random link asks you to install. Especially true with QR codes too. Watch out for those.
Yeah, I'd also add, make sure you're using an MDM and really locking down those BYOD devices if you can, or at least, making sure there's some basic security software installed.
Great. Thank you for that. Next question, should micro businesses be concerned about ransom attacks?
Yeah, absolutely. No, ransomware operators don't care if you're in some cases, don't care if you're a Fortune 500 company or a mom and pop shop on the corner. If they can extort you, they will. And so we all need to be on the lookout for these attacks.
Yeah, that's very important. The next question, have you noticed fewer spelling and grammar errors in phishing emails now that bad guys are using AI?
Yes. Very, very difficult to spot modern phishing emails, especially if they're AI generated, because it looks exactly like the email should look. Basically, the grammar is correct, the sentence structure is correct, and one of the other elements that I think people didn't really consider a lot when AI first started coming out and being used for these phishing templates. Phishing emails to non-English language speaking countries have skyrocketed because the AI can actually translate the phishing emails correctly into those languages as well. So it has actually opened the door for entire new markets for cyber criminals.
We do have a final question that just came in. What type of costs could a micro business budget for in penetration testing?
It really depends on the complexity and size of your infrastructure. Some micro businesses are like little healthcare clinics, may have compliance needs, may actually have stuff on-prem. Some are in the cloud. So if you want more information, info@lmgsecurity.com. They'll probably have a couple questions for you, and then they can get you an actual quote or something like that. But yeah, thanks for asking about that.
Thank you to everyone who submitted questions. Again, Sherry and Matt's contact info is up on the screen. So if you have any additional questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. We will send you a response as soon as we can. Thank you, Sherry and Matt, for your great webinar today. What an interesting topic. My name is Natalie Bray with LMG Security, and we would like to thank everyone who attended today's webinar. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.